Our brain is the most powerful muscle in the body. It's an organ that's surrounded by muscles, but it acts like a muscle that can grow and could actually, if we let it sit, it becomes dormant. But it's the most powerful muscle in the body, and it's the laziest muscle. And it wants to make sense of the world, so it tries to do this very quickly. And that's important to understand where implicit bias plays out, that while you might say, I prefer black over white, or green over yellow, or fall over spring, that's quick. But when it comes to implicit biases, they're underneath, and you can't eliminate them. And so your biases will be like this. The implicit bias happens like this. But when we slow down and say, tell me more about you, when you learn more about someone else, it changes how you see them.
Welcome to Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season includes 25 incredible episodes devoted to the inner development goals. Based on the science of personal transformation, the IDG framework represents 23 skills needed for today's world. And of course, empathy is one of them. You won't want to miss a single episode, so hit the subscribe button now. Thanks for watching and enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I am joined by Paul Forbes. He is a bias awareness and educational equity consultant who focuses on implicit bias, or what he refers to as the work behind the work. A native New Yorker who was born, raised, and still lives in Brooklyn, he has dedicated his professional life to working with students and families from historically underrepresented neighborhoods and communities. Before leaving the New York City Department of Education, where he was the executive director for Educational Equity, Anti-Bias, and Diversity, Paul provided oversight and support for the effective implementation and continuous development of the Implicit Bias CRE initiative for New York staff and administrators. He also helped develop a strategic vision to guide the implementation of training and professional development to schools, after-school providers, districts, and central offices on equity topics within education that included implicit bias, culturally responsive education, and discussions around systemic and structural racism. When Paul isn't working, he's watching and supporting his beloved New York Mets. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Good to be here. Thank you, Anita. This is wonderful. I'm thrilled to be here.
Me too. I know we're going to do a deep dive into one skill of the Inner Development Goals framework. When I met you, and we can explain later on how we came to meet, I thought you would be the perfect person. So I'm just going to read out what the skill is, folks. It's the Inclusive Mindset and Intercultural Competence skill, which the IDG framework describes as a willingness and competence to embrace diversity and include people and collectives with different views and backgrounds. So your work is in the States. That's a particular context. We might be able to extrapolate to the world out, but welcome to the show, Paul. And let me start with this. I love getting to know my guests, besides the bio, which is obviously very impressive. I'd love to know on a personal level what brings you to the work you do.
So again, thank you for having me here. You'll find out that an important part of who I am and what I believe is about telling our story, right? And so what you just said there, yeah, the bio is one thing, but I will tell folks I'm not worried about the bio per se. It's more about how we connect and tell the story and learn about each other. You know, I've been working in New York City, specifically in New York City Department of Education. Actually, when I started, it was the Board of Education. I was there so long, 23 and a half years, that it moved from the Board of Ed to Department of Ed. And actually right now, since I've left, it's now the New York City Public Schools. But for 23 and a half years in New York City Department of Education, I was tasked, as you heard, with different roles and responsibilities, both at a central level, school-based for a few years, we're mostly working with schools throughout New York City, the 5 boroughs. And in 2012, I was asked to, selected, I should say, a number of people applied, and I was selected to be the executive director of the Expanded Success initiative, ESI. And ESI was part of New York City's Young Men's Initiative, YMI. The Young Men's Initiative was at the time the largest public-private partnership in the country focused on improving outcomes for Black and Latino young men in health, justice, employment, and education. And I was blessed to lead the educational component, the Expanded Success Initiative, where we looked at ensuring that Black and Latino young men were graduating college and career ready. 2012, I became the executive director. We began working with 40 high schools to look at scope and sequence activities, what would ensure that when specifically our Black Latino young men, when they graduate, they would be ready to enter, persist, and succeed in college and career pathways. About 3.5, 4 years into the initiative, I had an experience. 2016, I went on vacation. I believe it's important that self-care, right? Work hard, quote unquote, play hard, right? So whenever the school year would end, I would take advantage of the July 4th break in the States. July 4th is Independence Day. And so with that time off, I would say, okay, I'm going to go away and take advantage of the day off that we would get and make a long vacation to decompress, to unwind, and get ready for the summer and the next school year. 2016, in July, I went to New Hampshire. Now, if you're not familiar with New Hampshire, it's close to Canada, but New Hampshire, in terms of the 48 continental states, it is one of the widest states in the country. And that's important to know because I will say when I entered the border, across the border into New Hampshire, I doubled the number of Black people in New Hampshire, right? And the guy at the gas station said to me, you just doubled the number of Black people because I'm the other Black guy here, right? And so it's a joke, but it really is that there aren't many people that look like me in general that live in New Hampshire. I pull up, and you may be able to see this, but I'm a big guy, right? 6'5", 320. I also, and it's good to know, I have my vehicle, I have an SUV, sports utility vehicle. It has, I talk about my beloved Mets. It has vanity plates that mention the Mets, right? And I've had experiences where I'll be driving and people think that I am a player, right? And I have the sign. So I've seen this happen before. And when I got to New Hampshire, I went to this resort. I get out, I go and check in. When I came back, there were people milling around. And the question was, who do you play for, right? And it was cute. I was like, okay, I get it. They look at me, big guy. And I started thinking, I get it. I know what's going on. People are saying, okay, why is he here? And in addition, it was expensive, about $400 a night, right? So it's a pretty expensive place. I'll spend in a week. And I get it, right? I was like, oh, I kind of chuckle. I was like, yeah, and they think again, I'm a player. But I was like, wait a minute. I've never asked anyone, are you a doctor? Are you a lawyer? I never asked, but it's been projected upon me. So my lived experience. But where it got deeper for me was later on, July 4th, as I'm sitting on the veranda, again, the only person of color in this resort. There was a 4th of July parade that happened. It was nice. But July 5th, I saw on Twitter news about a man, Alston Sterling, a Black man in Louisiana who had been shot by the police and killed. The next night, I started seeing something else start trending. Philando Castile in Minnesota, a Black man in his car with his girlfriend, his 4-year-old daughter in the back, and he was shot and killed in his car by a police officer. And I remember, on vacation, I mean, there was so much outrage that began in the country and my own thoughts. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't believe these white officers or these police officers, white or not, whether regardless of their race, I don't believe they went out that morning and said, we're going to kill a Black man. And I began to think about what contributes to that. And that's when I really started diving into this idea of unconscious bias, or what we've known in what we've learned from the research, implicit bias. And I became convinced and began to change my trajectory of the work that I would do, is to focus on understanding how our unconscious bias, how our lived experiences, how the movies we watch, how the things that we see on TV for the news, how that affects us. And just how we walk through life, where we live, what religion, what we've been taught, parents, guardians, all of that began to center for me the work that I needed to do. And so as I looked at the young men that I was working with, I began to say, I can't simply change scope and sequence. I can't just expose them to different activities. I have to start working with the adults to start thinking about, how do we examine what's going on for ourselves, and how do we begin to learn and hear the stories of others? Because like I said, I don't know those police officers. I don't want to label any as racist or sexist, misogynist. I don't want to put the label on them. What I do want to understand is what's going on here and what's going on in here. Good people with good intentions. And I wonder if they had heard the story of Sterling or Castile, if they had known a little bit more about these people, would they have been so quick to draw their weapon, to shoot, or they saw the daughter, if they knew their sister, their cousin, knew that they came from a certain neighborhood and played baseball with each other? I just wonder, not excusing, not saying you'll solve all these isms by that, but I began to think about, again, what causes us to slow down and pause, right? What helps us? And that's when I began to change. 2016, I began to really focus in and understand this idea of not just implicit bias, but how do we mitigate the effects of? What can we do intentionally? And I know we'll get to that, as it does. I believe it has a thread throughout the IDG, the framework that we look at and say, how does that work? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And how do we do that? But that's really where it started for me, that personal feeling of first me experiencing a single story or bias-based beliefs projected on me. Hey, is this guy LeBron James, or is this guy Jay-Z? The thought of, how can he afford this place, and why would he be here? Oh, he must be an athlete. He must be a rapper. Because there's no other reason why this person who looks like this would be standing and able to afford. And again, racist, no, that's not even going through my mind. And so that really said, what am I doing with my young men specifically, especially when I'm sending them to institutions where they might look like me, and they're the only ones, and how they're perceived and how they perceive themselves. And so that really is where it started for me to begin this work. And that is my passion, my foundational work in anything I do. I won't do any other topic unless I begin with examining our bias-based beliefs and understanding how we can mitigate the effects of, especially the key of it being an empathetic lens.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. I think that's a beautiful gateway to why this work is so meaningful to you. And as I'm listening, I'm thinking that, you know, you're talking specifically about the American context, or maybe North American context. I think I heard a stat just recently that the mixed race is shot up by 600%. So we are going to look varying shades of white all the way to black and everything in between, more and more. And it's not just in North America, right? As we see migration patterns happening all over the world in many different directions, the work that you are doing is important everywhere, because a woman who shows up with a hijab, there's some ideas about her right away. You know, whether it's in your case, what you're describing, in some cases it can be life or death, but sometimes it's about employability. Sometimes it's just about, you know, who gets invited to a birthday party. So very, 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 very important work. So let's dig into, what is this? I want to really unpack it so people understand, what is this thing called implicit bias or unconscious bias? Can you explain what it's about, and how you think it actually fits within the framework of the IDGs, the Inner Development Goals?
Sure. So implicit bias, in a general sense, in the clinical definition, refers to the attitudes, or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner, right? So I could say to you, who do you prefer, Michael Jackson or Prince? And very quickly, you might have an idea in your head and say one or the other. I might say to you, Anita, which do you prefer? Using a Mac or a PC? And Anita would say,
A Mac.
You're a Mac girl. Okay. So I'm in the audience, and there's folks that would raise their hand and say, I prefer PC. Others say Mac. And I say, you know, joke, I would say, some people are saying, whatever the school or district gives me, if it works, I'm good to go, whatever that is. But people have their preference. They raise their hand. They raise their hand. Do you prefer fall or spring? All these preferences that we have. Pretty quickly, we know what it is. And I would say to folks, that's bias. But we're talking about implicit bias, the stuff underneath, where, as you said, something that then affects you, employment, who goes to the party, who gets selected for the honors class, who gets suspended, who might literally life or death, might rely on a millisecond. That's the underneath stuff, the attitude of stereotypes that affect our understanding, action, and decision in an unconscious manner. And it can be favorable or unfavorable, because you will have implicit biases that manifest for your family and loved ones, right? If I said to you, oh, Anita, we met, that's great. JFK, can you pick me up at 3 o'clock in the morning? You'd be like, okay, Paul, I don't know, I don't know, man, that's nice, we met and everything. Now, if a sister, a cousin, your partner, hey, can you pick me up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Well, you might say no, but still, the idea is that you have a different thing for the person. So they could be favorable. But my thing is, as a Mets fan, what happens if someone comes in for employment and they speak and say, I'm a huge Yankee fan, or they're wearing, as you said, a Yankee hat, or on their resume, it says the Bronx, and I have an association with the Bronx Yankees, how that affects me, right? And again, you might seem like that's a nothing burger, but folks, we spend our life doing this all the time. As you said, what happens when you walk on the street and you see someone wearing a hijab? Boom, thoughts come to mind. If they're wearing a yarmulke, boom, thoughts come to mind. If they speak with a certain accent, boom, thoughts come to mind, where they're from, who they are, what class they should be in, their bilingual, this, without even knowing anything about them. Our brain is the most powerful muscle in the body. It's an organ that's surrounded by muscles, but it acts like a muscle that can grow and could actually, if we let it sit, it becomes dormant. But it's the most powerful muscle in the body, and it's the laziest muscle. And it wants to make sense of the world, so it tries to do this very quickly. And that's important to understand, where implicit bias plays out, that while you might say, I prefer black over white, or green over yellow, or fall over spring, that's quick. But when it comes to implicit biases, they're underneath, and they're based on lived experience and a lot of other factors, neuroscience that goes out to that. And so when I think about, again, what does that mean and how it relates to the framework, I tell people all the time, when you come to a workshop, you'll become more aware. I don't even call it a training, because you're not going to be trained at the end of it. You're not going to be saved, sanctified, healed, or cured when you come through, but you'll be more aware. That's my hope, is they're more aware of these bias-based beliefs and how they manifest. And you can't eliminate them. And so you can only mitigate the effects on practices, policies, procedures, pedagogy, and your behavior. And so that's where, as I look through IDG, the framework, the idea of what is it that I can do, as I started by saying, just getting to know each other just a little bit more. It changes the way I see you. When you learn more about someone else, it changes how you see them. And so your biases will be like this. The implicit bias happens like this. But when we slow down and say, tell me more about you. Oh my gosh, you wore glasses in elementary school? I wore glasses in elementary school. Oh, so you know about the comments, nerd, four eyes, the comments being made fun of. All of a sudden, I empathize in a way. And for those who may not have wore glasses, when they hear that story, they also could empathize, because at some point, they might have been bullied or made fun of with some other aspect. So maybe they start changing the way they might see someone with, hey, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that because that might offend or feel bad. I don't want them to have memories of PTSD, so I won't say that, or you just temper yourself, right? And so I just think that because implicit bias is something that happens like this and plays out underlying, that's important that we can begin to mitigate and de-bias by doing things like this. So again, I think the framework in my mind is just so interwoven in the work that I do to make sense of. If we do it a little bit more, I believe we would have a better community, a better world.
Now, as you're talking about that, what's coming up for me, a lot of things, obviously. I'm thinking that if we're not aware of our implicit bias, but we get told that some of the decisions or policies have embedded structural racism in them, somebody could react to, no, I'm not racist, right? I'm not racist. But the reality is that it's baked into the system that we're unaware of it. So I think as a first step, if you want to develop this intercultural competence, inclusive mindset, is the awareness that we all have biases, not because we are personally flawed, but because the world has taught us, normalized a certain structure that we're trying to upend. I mean, let's face it, we're gonna, that's the dream, so that we see each other for who we are. But then in addition to self-awareness, what I'm also hearing is proximity. So the idea, if you want to be a leader that has developed, the inner change that we want to see in the world, part of that is getting to know others, others in those quotes, intentionally reaching out to people that are not part of your circle, that do things differently, that eat different food, that travel different places, that have different religions on purpose to break some of those synaptic connections that make the bias unconscious.
Yes. Anita, I'm going to take you on the road with me. That was just so, that you capture the essence of the neuroscience and the why behind why I'm so passionate and focused on this work, and why I say this is a foundational session for me. So anyone that says, Paul, can you come and do work? Can you talk about race, privilege, power? Yes, I can. And I don't do any other discussion unless and until I've done the foundational session on implicit or examining and addressing our bias-based beliefs. And it's what you said. For me, I think why I've been successful is that people appreciate my approach, my message, my vulnerability, that I tell my story. I use I statements. I keep it local and personal. I don't come in with shame and blame. I'm not here to tell you, you bad. My thing is, if you identify as a thinking, breathing human being, you want to be in the space with me. And I make an assumption wherever I go, virtually or in person, I assume all the people, all the folks that I'm with are good people with good intentions. What I know is if you identify as a breathing, thinking human being, I know that you have implicit bias, period. If you identify as and no one's ever said to me, Paul, I don't identify as a thinking, breathing human being. So I know I'm interacting, not just I have implicit bias, but I'm interacting with folks who have implicit bias. And the second part of my assumption that I make when I come into space, that we're all good people, with good intentions. The research tells us that's not good enough. And that's why I focus on the work behind the work. Right? This idea of if we're not interrogating, doing reflective work, as you said, is important, right? Because someone will say, oh, the policies are there, but it's been baked. Folks, it's baked in. It's so insidious that it's there. And I'm saying we have to first become aware. And there's another A, take action, right? So if the awareness is there, but you can't just say, oh, okay, now I'm aware and move on, like it's some kind of training that you went through and said, okay, child abuse or whatever you do in education and just moving on to be aware of it. But now it's the actions. How then do we mitigate because of our awareness now? What can we do? And so it's multiple steps, and it does not absolve, because we'll talk about in my sessions intentions versus impact. And so many people say, that wasn't my intention. I'm a good intentioned person. It wasn't my intention. And I say, I forgive you. And can we have the conversation about how that landed for me? Can we talk about the impact? And that's important, because that's when we begin to see a shift and a change, is where you can hear, okay, I made a mistake, which we all will do. It wasn't my intention. And now, through an empathetic lens, I see how that landed. And so I know better, I will do better. That's the hope in how this all comes together.
Yeah, you're reminding me of a memory from so long ago. I was 19 or 20 years old. I was traveling in India with my then boyfriend.
So 8 years ago, 8 years ago, beautiful.
30 plus years ago. Wow, time has flown. And I wanted to buy a carpet. We went into a carpet shop, and I was the one that was going to buy it. But the salesman was only my boyfriend. And it had an impact on me. Like, I'm the one who's going to buy the carpet. Now, we talked about that afterwards. So there's many layers of complexity, right? There was a gendered issue around that. And my then boyfriend was visibly Indian looking, and maybe there was like, oh, I'm going to speak to, you know, my
in group, my personality
group, and maybe it was, and my then boyfriend was saying, actually, he was trying to be very respectful of you, Anita, because man to woman conversations would suggest that he doesn't respect the man. He's going to talk to the man to show how much respect he has for the woman. So it was layered, but we're doing it all the time. We're doing it all the time. And so it does take awareness, and it does take action. And I think that there's a little hurdle for a lot of people to get over, especially now that there's the backlash and there's the whole sort of politics about what side you're on. But like the defensive-ness that comes with this work, it's a shame that we feel so defensive about it, because I believe, and I can share a story later. I want to get to a few more questions and make sure if we have time for it. But I have experiences where going the distance for proximity and connecting with people to really get to know them feels so good. It feels so good. You know, to bridge the differences. We're, you know, anyways, okay.
I will say the neuroscience tells us what you say, that they can actually hook up the brain and you can see what flows, right? Whether it's the feel good, right? My thing is, I tell people, you may not know, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I know some neuroscience, right? And what I know is, especially young people, we want to have the oxytocin flowing, right? That's the love chemical, or the connection chemical. When the cortisol is flowing, that's when you put up your guard, and you get silent and say, nope, I'm going to protect. That's the fight, freeze, or flee. This does the amygdala. It does our brain, and that's again how our brain is. It's amazing what the brain can do. And if we're not aware that as a middle school teacher or administrator, we need to teach our ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, but we better be really focused on the social emotional aspect, on the connections. So greeting a student when they walk into that door, or when they're leaving, or what kind of activities we use. Again, you want to go through the curriculum, but if I know that oxytocin is what needs to flow, and that the brain reacts in a certain way and allows me to connect with you in a certain way. And again, we could be here literally all day. I can tell you, I know when and we'll talk about again, our connection, when I heard about what you do, and empathy and evangelist, like that language, something fired in my brain, my neural pathways, in a way that I said, I have to meet this person. And I did very quickly. I didn't know who I was meeting at that moment, but I'm saying all of that is when you know a little bit, it changes the way. And again, the happiness and joy when I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting next to this person. It was like, oh, when you start crushing on, or you start saying like, yes, I'm here. All of that is what we hope for. So all of a sudden, those young people saying, I'm in this class with Ms. Novak. Oh, great. I've heard about, or I know about this. All of a sudden, they're there to learn, and they want to make sure they do well in that class. So they'll show up. They won't have that fight at lunchtime because I don't want to disappoint Miss Anita. I want to make sure Mr. Paul is happy with me. All of that stuff, we need to understand and not do it from a clinical, oh, you did this, get out, be gone. There's a lot there. So what you said is just sage. It's beautiful. I'm saying, yes, this is why we need to focus here, because there's so much good, so much grace that you could extend to even that person from a different culture who might have had his own lived experience about what that represents, and how do we explain the impact, again, for a better, for a more beloved community, whether here in India, Canada, wherever we say, oh, this crosses cultures and ethnicities and race, because we all want to be seen, we all want to be heard, and we want to be honored.
You know, Paul, I don't know if I'm going to keep this in the podcast, but if you'll indulge maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I want to share a story that I know will touch you because it involves somebody we both know, because we were both at a fellowship retreat about creating beloved community. And it was, most of the gatherings were in a circle, and I intentionally moved around the circle so that I could meet as many people as possible. I remember we sat next to each other, I think the beginning, and then I said, Paul, don't take it personally. I'm just going to cross because I want to I want to move around.
Yes.
So at one point, I moved to another part of the circle I hadn't sat in. It was next to a Black man, and we chatted for a bit, and we didn't get the chance to chat very much through the day because our activities took us elsewhere. So because I didn't get to know him in that context, at lunch or at dinner, I don't remember, that day, I sat next to him again. And I discovered that he's an author and he's written some children's books. And this man, like, I wasn't alone at the table, so others were listening. He lit up in a way that I didn't see before when he was talking about his work. And it was amazing. Then a day later, something happened in the circle where he got up to speak, and he shared with so much courage and vulnerability what his experience was like as a Black man, that the minute he walks into a room, there's a set of expectations and attachments to who he is and what he is and who he isn't and what he isn't. And he just put it all out there. And it was a really big moment for all of us. I know you remember. And later on, after lunch, later that day, I remember we were walking down the hallway together, and I touched his shoulder and I just said, thank you so much for sharing. And he pulled away and walked faster. And I decided, I'm like, that's not about me. Like, he just broke things open, and now he just needs to like recover and just sort of, put some, and we didn't get the chance to talk much for the rest of the days. And I always thought, I'm like, I wonder if he knew how much I appreciated the moment that we got to hear about his book. And that I hope he didn't feel offended that the white girl's coming over to say, oh, thanks for the share, So I wasn't sure how things landed in the end for him in terms of our relationship. At the end of the last day, we were all saying our goodbyes. He came over to me and he said, I just want to thank you for coming and sitting next to me. So it did matter, it did matter. And so that's the kindness we can all give each other. And he gave the kindness back by acknowledging it. You know what I mean? So it's really powerful work.
Very powerful. And thank you for being open and vulnerable and sharing that, because I know the situation, because I was not there today because I had to go to Connecticut. I came back, but I was told. And then that night, like I said, I shared this, I stayed up till wee hours in the morning, just talking and connecting and just learning more about. And there was so much that, again, just texting with him, and it's just been amazing. And we could unpack that and talk about what was going on and what he shared, not about you, but in general, that sense of, after I opened up and became vulnerable, how I was now perceived as being placated or being like, oh, okay, just, okay, like, no, that's not what I want. I need you to hear the story so you can understand how you move forward, and just know, don't worry to thank me. Right? What kind of thing is in the mind? I don't need that. I need the actions. I need you to say, I'm going to stand for the next one that you don't see, and just perceive that when that person comes in, that I will intentionally move towards and connect with, and say, I'm here for you. So there's a lot there, and I'm glad that I do believe some of what I've practiced, just that empathetic lens helped me I was exhausted. I was so tired after a long day in Connecticut coming back, and I stayed up till almost 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't know him, but we just sat outside and just chopped it up. And that was, I think, I want to believe that part of my purpose, I believe there's a purpose for me to be in that space in general, but I believe that I had to be there just for this brother at that moment in time, because I know that things change again, I'm not saying I'm the difference maker, but for him to be able to have that conversation with affinity group, someone that he knows and can look at and say, you know what I'm talking about. That made a difference for the next 3 or 4, actually 5 days. That made such a difference, and I know that. And so I'm grateful, because it could have been totally different, right, if we didn't have that. And so that, again, that's why it's necessary for us just to practice that a little bit more. So I appreciate you sharing that, and thank you. Thank you.
And it's a segue to another question I want to ask you. Paul, you were wearing at the retreat t-shirt, right? And the front was your logo, business name, leading with hearts and minds. And on the back, you have a phrase, the work behind the work. So can you tell us what that's about?
Yeah. So what would happen is, as I said earlier when I started, I would do a lot of work, right? Which is belonging, connection. We would have the youth development strategies of how we build community, how we connect. Folks, when I would go into spaces, would say to me, oh, I'm doing the work. What's the work? The work of equity, work of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, or CRE, CRSE, culturally responsive and sustaining education or pedagogy. And a lot of stuff, I'm creating a better world. I'm doing the work. And I get it. And I love that. And as I said, why I'm so passionate about this is, while we're doing the work, while we're looking to disrupt and dismantle structures and systems that lead to inequitable outcomes, it's clear to me that we have to do the work behind the work, the introspective, reflective work. Are we putting the mirror up and saying, what role do I play in the outcomes that I'm seeing? If I'm not willing, if I'm only jumping into the deep end and going after institutional, 2020, the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, we saw something that started playing out, not just in Minneapolis, but in this country and around the world. People talking about injustice, about fairness, specifically Black people, how they've been treated. I think, like, in Canada, excuse me, in Canada, we talk about the indigenous folks and what's been done, the truth and reconciliation, I believe you had, whether it was South Africa and Canada. And I think about that, and I will say that has not been done in this country, right? This country is founded on the genocide of one group of folks and the enslavement of another group, and we've never had. And so 2020, for many people, and me as a Black man, local and personal, I was like, yes, I want to see these changes. I want to see the football teams talking about, we're going to put money in for this, and baseball and racism, we're all in this together. And I had a cautionary warning. I was like, be careful, because I've seen this before. There's a backlash, civil rights movement. When you see movements, there's a backlash to say, no, let's go back to where it was, right? And so for me, we could disrupt and dismantle, we could tear down those structures and systems. And if we're not willing to do the work behind the work, if we're not willing to do the self-work, the reflective, introspective work, we will build back new structures with new bells and whistles that actually at the foundation still has our bias-based beliefs. And that's important to deal with and reconcile, because when we get down the road and other things happen, all of a sudden you say, you see, this doesn't work, let's go back. And again, we're seeing that, right? In this country, CRT, the whole idea of, let's can't talk about race, or don't talk about these bills that are being created across the country here in the States of no this, or trans folks, and no affirming care for them, or I mean, there's so many layers, right, of so much stuff that gets taken away when you say we don't want to have that, because we've gone too far to being kind and good to one another. That's the antithesis of what I say as a society we need. We need to come together more. We need to connect more, right? And so for me, the work behind the work begins with Anita, begins with Paul, an equity warrior traveling all over the country, all over the New York City, all over New York State, doing this work and understanding I too have these biases. I too have single stories. And I will manifest when I look at Anita, it will manifest when I go to another country. I'm going to Canada, the ideas, I'm going to Mexico, the ideas that I have. I'm going to the South, I'm going to the Midwest, boom, what ideas come for me. And I have so many stories I could tell about how I've gone through this, real time, as I'm going to the Midwest and assuming, Iowa, just cornfields. Iowa, you have big cities in Iowa, what are you talking about? Paul Forbes, equity warrior. So I'm saying to us, let's examine, and it's not just a one-off thing, it's a daily walk. everything, not just professionally, but personally as well. So the work behind the work is that ongoing piece where we say, what role do I play in the outcomes that I'm seeing? And to be honest, to thine own self, be true.
So what you're saying now kind of makes me want to, we have two final questions, Paul, and I see the clock is ticking. I don't want to take a lot of time doing
Yes.
this, but since we're focusing on the IDGs, what you're saying is an invitation to reflect on the being category, right? Having the inner compass, deeply felt sense of responsibility and commitment to values and purposes relating to the good of the whole, right? Openness and learning mindset, having a basic mindset of curiosity and willingness to be vulnerable and embrace change and growth. And then there's the self-awareness, ability to be reflective,
Yes.
with your own thoughts, feelings, desires, having a realistic self-image and ability to regulate yourself. So there's a lot there in the being section, but then also there's a lot in the relating section, right?
Yes. Yes.
Appreciating, relating to others and to the world with a basic sense of appreciation, gratitude, and joy. Connectedness, having a keen sense of being connected with or being part of a larger whole, like, you know, go on and on and on and on. So the penultimate question here is about some of the work you do in schools, which I can extrapolate to the business world. Okay, so you work mostly with teachers and educators and administrators. Okay, so let me ask you this question. You know, how do you respond to the educator who says, but this can also be, how do you respond to the leader in a company who says, my focus is on the subject matter that I teach. My focus is on the widgets that we're selling or the services we're providing. And these soft skills like empathy and perspective taking and DEI should be taught elsewhere. They don't belong at school. They don't belong in the workplace. What do you say to them?
Thanks for that question. I hear that often. It could be blatantly, or it's built into what they're saying. I infer. I extend care and grace. I understand there's pressures for the bottom line profit. I understand that there are test scores you have to produce, and so I go with, again, an empathetic lens and extending care and grace. I've been there before, right? I know the pressure. Explain to me how at the end of the day we get this, we get that. What I've learned that I use the idea of saying, folks, it's not either or, it's both and. And I say it's important, but all the time I say, think about who you are right now and how you got there. Think about what experiences you had in life that allowed you to be the person you are, the leader, the executive director, the teacher, the administrator. And in that conversation, folks begin to speak about things that they call soft skills, which I don't like. Words matter, right? So I don't like to use soft skills, because by saying soft skills, you're not saying that's just someone else does that. The counselor does that, or home. We do this here. We do the hard skills. And I usually say, then think about Pythagorean theorem. Think about who won the War of 1812. Think about all the stuff we learned that we had to regurgitate for a test and all that. How much of that do you remember? But do you remember about caring and communication and collaboration? And you're a leader and you expect the team to do certain things to get to that bottom line. Think about what you needed to be, who you are, who gave you grace, who, when you had to be patient, or somebody had to be patient with you. Think about all those virtues, all those characteristics. Those are what we call those soft skills. And I would say, if we're not doing that as part of our school community, as part of our office community, as part of our department, then what happens when that person leaves us here? What have they learned? They might have that skills, and that might be okay of saying that technical skill, but it's adaptive skills that I want people to understand, that we all naturally, organically experience one way or the other of what to do, what not to do, how we want to treat or how we do not want to be treated. And so my thing is, when people slow down, the power of the pause, when people slow down and begin to unpack and say, wait a minute, I am who I am because someone stayed up and helped me through some tough spots in my teaching license piece to get to my schooling, or because of this, when I had something happen, some extended care and grace, or a friend listened to me, or I had to overcome this to become the executive director or the leader of this. You start realizing it can't be an either or. It's a both and. And so, again, using those same skills of turning it back inward and having you examine what it took. That usually helps me with folks begin to say, aha, okay, I get it. We still have work to do, of how do I do this? How do I know when it's happening? I'm saying it needs to be baked into the DNA as much as doing 1, 2, 3 and the ABCs that we're talking about: appreciation, humility, openness, willing to bring in other perspective taken, just points of views. When they hear it in that manner, they begin to understand and they say, okay, let me give it a try. Again, it's not always perfect, but it helps along the way.
Well, so that's it. You know, whether it's teachers or business leaders, we have job descriptions. But if you think of Maya Angelou's quote that I love,
yeah,
we'll forget what you said
yeah,
today. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
right.
That is the work of,
You know,
and excellent teachers know that. Excellent bosses know that, and
okay.
let's strive to that, right?
And I will just quickly, excellent teachers, I will say, whether you're excellent or not, because people want to say, again, say it based on a rubric, you may not be there yet, but a teacher that will become, I will see you not as you are, but as you will be on that journey. I would say the excellence came because you were able to recognize that. And so I don't want people to think it's the end game of, oh, I'm not an excellent teacher either, or if I don't have that. You can get there. And so I want to give that grace and care to folks to say, we're on a journey.
Same thing with leaders in any space, in any sector. Love that. And that means like being a parent on a baseball field, or, you know,
Yes.
anywhere. Okay.
Yes.
We have just a few minutes left, Paul.
Yep.
This is how I love to end
Yeah.
my podcast with the question: can you think of a time when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you?
Yeah. So I love this and this idea, because I oftentimes don't think about it. I'm my nature is one to give and to make sure I create the spaces and environments where we connect. And I think, again, you know, from how I showed up and how I believe, you know, let's come together, beloved community. About 24 years ago, I was a dean of discipline in East Harlem. I was a pre-med student who was going to go on to become a doctor. I had my plan or vision, and we don't have time now to go into it, but I found myself working at the Board of Education and then going to a school in East Harlem. And people know about the history of Harlem. This is before gentrification and things started changing, and it was tough, gritty Harlem, East Harlem. And the school was just coming out of, it was a school under registration review, the state took it over. So I'm there, the principal said, I know you don't have a background as a teacher, you don't have any classes or anything, I need a dean. He saw a good-looking, big black man and was like, I need you to be there and just be a presence, right? So he couldn't find a good-looking one, but he found me. And so he said, okay, I'm gonna have this guy. And so I was there. And so I knew I had to do some things like just research and learn about how do you conflict resolution and being a dean, what that means and all that, safety, all kinds of stuff. So I'm learning all that, going through the books. There's one day, I had two students, Tyreek and Taekwon, who came to our school, and they were what we call STH, students in temporary housing, meaning they were experiencing homelessness and were staying at a shelter with their mom. Mom came in. Mom really loved me, just thought, you know, I was really doing some good things in the school and everything. And I was always kind to her. And these two young boys, when you get housing, you then go to another district and you could go to your neighborhood school. Because they loved the school, they said, you know what, we want to keep coming up to East Harlem. My principal was like, no, encourage them to stay at their local, they attended. But you know what, I was like, if they get here, when they get here, we're better for them. Taekwon. Tyreek was a younger student, big guy, husky. And there was a time when he was in the lunchroom wearing his coat. And we were saying, when you stay inside, you don't bring your coat down and wear your coat inside. You leave it in the classroom for different reasons. We weren't going out in clement weather. I came into the lunchroom, I looked around, and I saw Tyreek wearing his coat. I went over to the middle of the space, and I know the book says, when you have something like this, you make a general announcement. So I was like, okay, practicing what I've been told. I made a general announcement. Remember, don't wear your coats and everything. Please make sure if you have your coat, you remove it. Tyreek doesn't do anything. I remember the textbook, get a little closer, proximity, so you speak again to make sure they heard what you said. So I got closer, I said the same thing. Remember, folks, again, you're not wearing, okay. The last thing is that you close the gap and you go right to the person and say, hey, this is what I come close. I speak to Tyreek. I said, you have to remove your coat. And Tyreek is not doing anything. He's not removing it. He's not. Now, I know as the new dean, the new sheriff in town, I know what's happening. Folks in the room are looking and saying, what's going to happen now? Will he be or will he be a joke? And so I said, listen, either you do it your way or you're going to do it the hard way. I'm going to eventually have my way. And I remember, and I think back to, again, the harm that I have caused and how I'm doing the work that I do to ensure that doesn't happen to another Tyreek or Taekwon or anyone. I remember in my response, I grabbed Tyreek and basically dragged him to the office. And I told the principal, get his mother in here. She's going to do what she has to do and everything. The mother comes in. We have a meeting. And I remember the mom saying, thank you, Mr. Forbes. She made Tyreek apologize and everything. She said, this won't be a problem. I'm going to take him home for the rest of the day. And I'm feeling good. Like, yep, I told you, I win. Like, well, okay. As we're walking out, the principal left, Tyreek left. Just before we got to the door, mom stopped and came back to me and said, Mr. Forbes, you know I love you. You know I respect you and everything, but I just want you to know, I'm going to take care of this. He won't do that again. But I want you to know, in the shelter, they don't take their coat off. Because if they take their coat off, someone's going to steal it. And so he has that mentality and mindset. Anita, that was such a transformative moment for me. It was a paradigm shift. I had been shown grace. She could have said in a meeting, she could have gone off for me. She could have said this and that, but she knew what I am about, and she knew I made a mistake. And she waited till everyone left just to hold me back to say, Paul, Mr. Forbes, even Paul, but Mr. Forbes, I just want you to know. And what that did for me was change the way that I saw. I mean, Tyreek still had issues with me throughout the year. He apologized. He still had that. And I know for me, that was transformative. That when I became, as you talk about leadership, when I became the director, youth development director for a portion of Manhattan and the Bronx, one thing I did with my team, one of the first things I did was I said, you will all go to a shelter and spend half a day. I want you to know what the experiences are. So when we're making our policies, when we're putting funding in, when we're doing our work, that we understand the lived experience. Because maybe you have not been to a shelter, and I hadn't been. But that one event for me, where empathy was shown to me and grace, I know it changed my paradigm. And I know when I speak about STH or students who are experiencing homelessness temporarily, what that means to me and how I now can see the other. And so I am grateful for that. I know it's been 20-something years later. It's still been a difference for me, and it's helped me in the way in which I move through spaces and the way I connect people and tell stories.
An incredibly powerful story, Paul, and what a way to end our conversation. You may have not gone to med school, but you are a healer, and your work is about healing, us healing individually and collectively. Thank you for your time. Thank you for everyone who's been watching and listening. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
If you know someone who'd benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Post the link on your socials and hit the subscribe button now. The world needs more empathy, and you have an important role to play.